You are watching DHTV from California State University, Dominguez Hills.
Okay, in this presentation we're going to cover Mesopotamia. Several important civilizations appeared between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers beginning around 5000 BCE. Now both the Tigris and Euphrates rivers flow from modern-day Turkey into the Persian Gulf. The geographical area around and between the rivers is crescent in shape, and it's excellent for agriculture due to its rich soil. Now, today, this so-called Fertile Crescent is home to Syria, Iraq, Israel, Lebanon, and Jordan. So when the Greeks are going to conquer the region, they're going to name it the land between the rivers, or Mesopotamia. Erratic patterns of water flow often leads to flooding, but yet the advantages of living in the crescent area are beneficial because as the deposits of silt left when the waters recede provided nutrient-rich soil yielding great agricultural benefits. Now, control of the floodwaters through ditch digging and dam construction by the early inhabitants led to some sophisticated environmental religious practices. And as the people improved on their archaic era subsistence techniques, the creation of surplus food production allowed for specialization and the development of sophisticated irrigation infrastructural applications. Now, appearing from the east in the lower southern portion of the region called Sumeria, farmers and merchants created a series of centralized market systems. Although they did not think of themselves as Sumerians, by 3000 BCE, the people created 12 city-states in the region, with each city-state having autonomy in religious, political, and economic affairs. Each centralized state society maintained a religious center known as a ziggurat, dedicated to the specific deity linked to the environment. Kings served as high priests and maintained relations with the supernatural and the living of the earth. Now, responsibility fell upon the priesthood to appease the supernatural forces controlling wind and water and the unpredictability of floods. So each ziggurat teamed with activity as the forces of nature cruelly ravaged the countryside and made slaves of the people. Now, as the textbook shares, the best known ziggurat was the Tower of Babel of biblical fame. So religious and political stability, along with competition for water accessibility, allowed for impressive achievements in writing, medicine, irrigation technology, and a calendric and numbering system. Most city-states developed a monarchical form of government where the high priest attempted to create order out of chaos and defended their sovereignty and water rights against others' encroachments. So Sumerians were linguistically a puzzle. Sumerian writing consisted of drawing pictures of objects called pictographs. These ideograms were conventionalized signs that were understood to represent ideas. The sign for a star could be used to indicate heaven or the sky or a creator so defined. This writing, known as cuneiform, was created by using a reed to inscribe wedge-shaped marks on wet clay tablets. And then they were hardened in ovens, making it difficult or impossible to change. So a specific class of people emerged known as scribes. And these scribes could only master the complicated system of writing, which included keeping records, recording history, and writing myths. The script could set down languages of both Semitic, known as Akkadian, and Indo-European, or Hittite and Persian. One historian surmised that 2,000 symbols in a script required specialists, where script writing became a profession. And when the Greeks conquered the area, cuneiform was an arcane mystery to them. Sumerian medicine included a combination of magic, prescriptions, and surgery. So it was understood by the Sumerians that demons and evil spirits caused sickness, and magic spells and prescriptions could drive them out. This led to slow empirical fashion in increasing medical knowledge. Now, they called themselves the black-headed people, and their arts and crafts were revealed to them by spirits. Everything must have a name to assure a place in the universe. Inventions were associated with agricultural production and the control of flood waters. They counted and wrote numbers using base 10 and base 60, the hour and the circle. 12 lunar months, with every 3 years adjustments made to incorporate religious festivals. Now, being high on the arts, mud brick and baked brick produced monumental architecture using arches and vaults. The powerful and the immortal, the visible and the invisible, took human shape in statuary. Buildings and temples were constructed to reveal the human ideal in music, victory, law, and sex. Now, since each city-state was distinct in origin, their religious organization made a transition from a theocracy to kingdom empires. Now let's see if I can do justice to their oral tradition. In their understanding of how the universe was created, the sea existed first and produced heaven and earth, which became united. The sea then gave birth to Enlil, who separated heaven and earth. And this made possible the creation of other supernatural forces representing the environment. So 50 spirits assisted in the separation of the earth from heaven, and they became an assembly, all competing for attention. Oral tradition states An is the divine force representing heaven, sky, representing shining. Enlil is male, representing nature, storms, and supporting female. Nin Kursag is a female representing Mother Earth. Enki represents water fertility, and without Enki, there is no wisdom. And then there was Anunnaki, which was a balance between good and evil. Anunnaki let spirits out, representing the water, sky, earth, and human. Then there's Tiamat and Apsu, who arose from the chaotic water through procreation, and they created the spirits. Now, the idea was to create an environment where chaos turns to peace. So sky, earth, and human celebrate spring, known as Akitu. This was the festival of the land. This was a New Year's feast that lasted 11 days. The fourth day was known as Enuma Elish, which begins the new year that starts with gloom, but it leads to purification and ultimately reaching joy. It was a conscious divine action for divine purpose. And so the idea was to connect with everything before. So the peoples were animate, or all human with nature. This is the problem monotheistic religions have with environmental religions. In each specific geographic space, people are connected to plants and animals. They are not seen apart. Now, I will come back to this later when we will come to see that monotheism develops into an efficient political tool used to assert one's claim to land that does not belong to them. The great example the Sumerians expounded is the notion of fertility of the fields and animal husbandry. They are female, Mother Earth, not male. The Neolithic period reveals female figurines celebrating womanhood. Iana goes to the underworld, and when she returns, agricultural life begins. She becomes Ishtar. And the new year begins when her husband, Dumuzi, went to hell for her. So the people celebrate his sacrifice for her. Then there is the story of the flood known as the Epic of Gilgamesh. This became accepted oral tradition around 2000 BCE. Now the epic is about life and death. The epic is of people and creation and immortality. So please go to the textbook, which gives an elaborate rendition of the oral tradition. Basically, the king of Uruk was so mean that the assembly of spirits counters him with a wild man known as Enkidu. And this story forms part of Abraham's oral tradition that was recorded in Genesis. Most of the spirits are human, yet the spirits do not care about humans because they get drunk, they make merry, and they conjugate amongst themselves. So each city-state related this story to their spirit to their special spirit that was centered in the ziggurat. Death was shadowy, and life was dependent on the fertility of the land. It was the rivers that brought life. Water. Water is the key to life. So the Epic of Gilgamesh centers on human figures. It was the nature of man who strives and creates, but in the end must die. Enkidu is to subdue Gilgamesh for his harshness. Gilgamesh sends a harlot to tame him, representing the passage of mankind to civilization. Enkidu is to become like a man, putting on clothing and protect cattle from lions and wolves. And Gilgamesh joins Enkidu, and they fight monsters, not humans. Enkidu offends Ishtar in the course of his exploits and dies. Gilgamesh wants to bring him back to life and meets Noah, Ut-Napishtim, who tells about the flood and advised him about how to get the plant of eternal life from under the sea. Gilgamesh gets the plant, but lost the plant to the snake. The basicness of the story is that the dead cannot be brought back to life. Now, this story is also compared to the Iliad, where Achilles loses his friend Patroclus. Now, both stories are about how the divine determines earthly events. Basically, people have freedom to oppose the spirits. So the myths are meditations on the qualities of humanity. So the structure of society was greatly elaborated by the time of two important leaders. Social classes became differentiated. There was economic exploitation and social unrest. Laws were developed to regulate social and economic relationships and prevent undue oppression. Interstate warfare appeared and led to imperialism, and in turn produced military classes and bureaucratic systems to run the larger states that were born of conquest. Now, in the state of Akkad, a sheep herder's son who was abandoned in a reed basket in the Euphrates River by his mother, dealt with adversity through ambition and determination. Sargon the first rose to become political leader of Akkad and launched aggressive campaigns of conquest against the other city-states, positioning himself in history to be referred to as Sargon the Great. He conquered all but one of the city-states, Ebla. Now, in the process, Sumerian culture spread and influenced the Afro-Eurasian region, now known as the Near East and the Middle East. And as stated in the textbook, their cultural and religious achievements and beliefs would be picked up by their conquerors and essentially retained by all their successors in Mesopotamia. But it was the city-state of Ebla who resisted Sargon's attacks and counterattacked after Sargon's death. And with that, the Akkadian Empire was diffused. And by 2000 BCE, another group known as the Amorites, outsiders from West Syria, are going to conquer Ebla and the entire Fertile Crescent. And they situated themselves in Babylon as they made Babylon their capital city. Henceforth, the Amorites became identified as Babylonians. They borrowed and adopted all things Sumerian. Military and bureaucratic systems reflected the different classes of people in society. Kings, priests, and nobles benefited from imperialistic rule. Artisans, merchants, and farmers prospered from intercity-state trade. And slaves from the conquered peoples provided service to both the ruling elite and market participants. The Babylonians' greatest achievements occurred under the rule of Hammurabi, who ruled between 1792 and 1750 BCE. And after conquering the entire Fertile Crescent, order was brought through the establishment of a tax structure easing the collection of revenue. So by investing in irrigation canals and infrastructural development projects, agricultural productivity improved under Hammurabi, and it increased the prosperity of those who benefited the most from the system. And Hammurabi's crowning achievement was the code of laws designed to ease and bring justice to the competitive merchant and artisan classes, and most importantly, to lighten the exploitation of the lower classes and slaves. Now, it can be argued that the Code of Laws became one of the first movements towards equality under the law. And this is why it's known as an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So with the death of Hammurabi, the decline of the Babylonians by 1600 BCE, they fell to a group known as the Hittites. So please watch the National Geographic's short documentary on Mesopotamia that follows this presentation, and this will conclude this presentation. Thanks.